Well, good morning. It's good to have our visitors with us. Glad that you're here. We're going to do something a little bit different this morning than what we have been doing. We've been going through the book of Exodus, but we're not going to do that this morning. I wanted to look at a different thing in preparation for later this morning, just to get our minds perhaps a little bit more right and understanding the resurrection and what led up to that. And I was thinking about a lesson, and it's funny how sometimes things really stick in your mind. I remembered a lesson hearing at Affirming the Faith in Oklahoma City about the trial of Jesus. And Brother Melvin Otey, who is a criminal lawyer, attorney, he gave this really great lesson about how the trial of Jesus was just a fake trial, a mock trial. It wasn't justice at all. And I remembered hearing that, and it felt like it was yesterday, and I got to go to the Affirming the Faith website, and I looked all that up, and it happened in 2019. I was like, that was a lot longer ago than I remember. And so I did re-listen to that, and I wanted to bring that to you. And so I want you to let you know that this lesson is not original to me, is a condensed version. He had 45 minutes. I'm going to try to condense that down to 15. That's quite a task. We'll see if we can get it done. He mentions in this that in the trial of Jesus, we, as the United States of America, we have rules and regulations as to how a trial is to be conducted. There is a legitimate judiciary process that we must go through. Otherwise, the trial isn't proper. It doesn't work. It can be dismissed. The Jews were no different. The law, of course, required truth. It required that justice be done. God is a God of justice. The Jews, as the people of God, should have also wanted justice, and by and large, that's what they wanted. But this was an exception. We're going to look this morning at three phases of these systemic failures, these procedural violations, these calculated corruptions that occurred during the trial of Jesus. But as we do so, as we look at all of these, we need to keep in mind, and we're going to see as we wrap all this up, that while human justice was failing in this occasion, God's redemptive plan was perfectly holding together. We're going to look first off, if you have your Bibles, and turn over with me to John chapter 18. I also have the text here on the screen. It is a length, there's a lot of reading that we're going to be doing this morning. I think I have everything that we're going to read on the screen, but just in case, we'll be in John chapter 18. We're going to see Jesus before Annas. Let's start reading in John 18 and verse 12. So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter stood outside at the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, You also are not one of this man's disciples, are you? He said, I am not. Now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me. What I said to them, they know what I said. When he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? And Jesus answered him, If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me? Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. We see our journey beginning here in the dead of night. Jesus is brought to Annas, the father-in-law of the high priest. He was formerly the high priest until he was deposed by the Roman government. They didn't like him, so they put in his son-in-law. And so essentially what we have in effect is two high priests. serving at the same time, one in name and the other in honor. And so the first person that they take Jesus to is Annas. And if you ask any first-year law student, if they're trying to decide if a fair trial is being had, if it's happening, you would know that, of course, if it's happening under the dead of night in secret, then it is not, by definition, a fair trial. Something is trying to be hidden. This is an irregularity. But that being at night is not the only thing. Annas also doesn't call witnesses. He doesn't present evidence. He instead tries to interrogate Jesus directly, and he tries to force Jesus to testify against himself, seeking a gotcha moment to build a case that doesn't yet exist. Jesus, of course, responds in a way that would imply that this trial is not being held in the correct way. He stands on the principle of proper legal procedure. He says, if there's an issue, why don't you call witnesses? Why don't you go find the people that I spoke to? I've not spoken in private. Go into public, find the people, and bring the witnesses. He was demanding due process that the law required, and they ignored it. And so the result of this first occasion, this first response in this trial, is corruption. When they couldn't find a foothold, they resorted to violence. The officer strikes him, and in that moment, the mask of what this was supposedly falls off. We see immediately that this isn't intended to be a fair trial. It's not a search for truth. There is a predetermined outcome in the minds of those who have arrested Jesus, and they don't want justice. They want a conviction. He is, of course, then sent to Caiaphas. We're going to turn over to Matthew chapter 26. We'll read the text and then make some additional comments. Starting in verse 59. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At least two came forward and said, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." And the high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" And they answered, "He deserves death." And they spit in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" We go from Annas to the house of Caiaphas. And if the first little section of this trial was irregular, this would constitute as what is called a kangaroo court. This is just some show, some mockery, a rigged process of alleged justice. The Sanhedrin, the very body that was supposed to protect the law, acted as the investigator, the prosecutor, and the judge. In our modern context, we are deeply sensitive to the dangers of hidden trials. In our nation, we have a Sixth Amendment so we can have the right to a public trial, just because we know that if a trial is held in private where there is no way to oversee that it was fair, then we know that it probably wasn't. The Jews would have understood this too, and there was also laws against such trials, and they ignored their own law. They ignored their own demands for justice, violated their own statutes, and they operated in the shadows specifically to avoid the scrutiny of the public. Then, of course, we see here that there is a lack of credible evidence. They scour the city for witnesses. Many false witnesses come in. They try to find two people whose stories match. They're unable to do so until finally they're reduced to paying for perjury. They hire false witnesses to manufacture a narrative. And when you buy your evidence, you've already admitted that the truth isn't on your side. Finally, Caiaphas bypasses the legal requirements entirely. He puts Jesus under oath and he demanded to know, are you the Christ, the Son of God? And when Jesus spoke the truth, they labeled it as blasphemy. They closed the book, skipped the closing arguments, and pronounced death on the Son of God. A sentence, by the way, that had no standing under Roman law, which moves us into the phase 3 of this miscarriage of justice. We're heading back to John chapter 18, starting in verse 28. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? And they answered him, if this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you. Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. The Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. This was to fulfill the words that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered, do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to you or to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world. Then Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? And they cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe, and they came up to him saying, hail, King of the Jews, and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, see, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him. So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, behold the man. When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to them, you will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? And Jesus answered him, you would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. That was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, behold your king. They cried out, away with him, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priest answered, we have no king but Caesar. So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus. I know it was a lengthy reading, but it's important for us to read all of that in context because we see over and over again that the Roman authority in charge of delivering true justice came out and said, I find no guilt in him. There was no cause. Pilate was a cynical man, but he was a Roman governor. He was trained in the law. He interviewed the prisoner, and came out to the mob with a clear verdict. This man is innocent. He has done nothing deserving of death. I'm going to release him. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly he made this attempt. But then comes the political coercion. When the religious leaders realized that they couldn't win with facts. When Pilate wasn't going to bend to their will based upon what they had said on the hearsay that they had brought to his ears, when they realized that he wanted to let him go, they resorted to blackmail. They told Pilate, if you let this man go, you are not a friend of Caesar. They traded justice for a job. In essence, it can be hard for us to understand what they're saying in this moment, but what they are saying is, if you do not do this for us, you are no friend of Caesar. We will go to him and tell him that you are all right with kings other than Caesar. And that might just cost you your job. In fact, it might have cost him his life. They traded, to save his own status, Pilate washed his hands of the blood of an innocent man and handed him over to be crucified. He gave them what they wanted to make his own way easier because of the coercion that they laid at his feet. As I listened to what our brother Melvin Ote said as he goes through this lesson, I hope that you'll go listen to it in its entirety. It's online. It's fascinating to me that when we look at the trial of Jesus, we see a breakdown of everything that the law is supposed to stand for. It was a dark night of lawlessness, of corruption, of coercion. And it seems as though it won on Friday. But as believers, we look at this and we see a level of sovereignty from our God that no court, human court, can overrule. In Acts chapter 2, Peter stands up and he gives the final closing argument, if you will, in the courtroom of the public. He says that Jesus was delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. From the outside looking in, for anybody that's standing around and looking at the trial of Jesus and the miscarriage of justice that it was and how terrible of an event that was, people might say evil won that day. But Peter stands up in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost and says, no, he was delivered up according to the plan and the foreknowledge of God. God used this broken system, this level of evil that was used to put Jesus on the cross to carry out his own purposes. God used their corruption to deliver the sacrifice that saves mankind from their sins. What man intended for evil, when men wanted to silence a troublemaker, God used it for the ultimate triumph of the human family. The trial was a sham. It was a farce. But the result was our salvation. The verdict was guilty, but because he took that sentence, the high court of heaven can now declare us not guilty. And so I just leave you with the knowledge that the case is closed. And the case that closed on Jesus that led him to be crucified and buried seemed like evil had won on Friday and Saturday. But Sunday was coming, and Sunday shows that the victory was won. Offer the invitation if there's anything that we can help you with. All things are ready. You can come now as we stand and sing. Yield not to temptation, for yielding is sin. Each victory to help you.